What's going on, everyone? It's Alex. Thanks for joining me back on the channel and checking out this new video. So we have the G back in the garage because today we're doing another install video. Now this is something that should have been done a long time ago, and I've actually had the parts to do this for almost 2 years, which is kind of embarrassing to say. But anyway, today we are going to be installing Swift lowering springs on the G. So as you see here, as with every stock vehicle, there's a whole lot of wheel gap, both front and back. So like I said, today we'll be installing these awesome Swift lowering springs. And the nice thing about these springs is I didn't really want to do the front upper control arms or aftermarket rear toe arms just at this time. So these springs offer about I want to say it's a 1.2 drop in the front, I think a 0.8 of an inch in a drop in the back. So with the minimal drop, it'll both help the car look a little bit better, perform better, but the car will be put into stock alignment specs with the stock arms, so you don't have to spend the extra money if you don't want to at this time or right away to get the aftermarket arms. So enough of me talking, let's jack up this car, get this started. We're going to start with the rear. It's pretty easy to start with, so it's good to get your feet wet, get that started, and then we'll go to the front. Alright, rear of the car is jacked up and on jack stands, so now it's time to pull the wheels off and get this thing started. Alright, so now that the wheel's off, I can show you what we're going to be working with today. So there's the rear spring. On the rear of these cars, the shock is separate from the spring, which makes it really easy to swap out these springs. So basically all you need to do back here is remove this bolt. I believe it's a 19mm, and then this bottom cradle will swing down and away, and then you can remove the spring. I would suggest putting your jack up here, just putting a little tension on it makes it easier to pull out this bolt, and then you can drop it down with the jack. And everything is the exact same on the opposite side, so I'm just going to show you the one time on here. It's kind of redundant to go on the other side, but both sides, pull this bolt out, drop this down, and swap out the spring. Alright, so we're ready to pull this bolt out. It is actually a 17mm both for the bolt and the nut back here, so just use a wrench back here, and then I'm just using my socket here, loosen this up, bolt will come out, and then like I said, this cradle will drop down. Then once your bolt is out, you can literally just push this down, and then the spring will come out over this stop here. So now we just transfer this little bump stop and insulator onto the new Swift springs and do everything in reverse order, and then one corner will be done. Alright, so here are nice new springs. They are nicely labeled rear, focus. Anyway, that says rear. And there you have the front. It doesn't matter which corner they go on, but obviously it is specific front to rear, rear to front. So like I just showed you, these are the rears. That's what we'll be throwing back in there, and then we'll save these for the front. Alright, a couple things to note before you put these back in. There is a little groove here on this lower cradle part that matches the insulator on the bottom. So you have that raised there, so make sure that that goes back in there correctly. And I did take the upper insulator portion off just because it has a little mark here from where the other spring is. So I just like to match everything up just to minimize any problems. So now that both the insulators or stops, whatever you like to call them, are on the new spring, we can throw them back in this bucket and get everything bolted back together. Alright, so new spring is in the bucket there, and the bolt is in just about finger tight. One thing that I do want to mention is that when tightening these suspension bolts, there's the rubber bushings that are in there. They don't have free motion, they kind of just flex in the rubber sleeve that's in there. So you want to make sure that you jack up the axle, the suspension components, to basically where it's going to be sitting once the car has its wheels and tires on and it's lowered. And then once you do that, then you can go ahead and tighten these bolts down here, because that will prevent the bushing from ripping, because you'll basically be tightening it to where the car is going to actually be sitting, instead of tightening the bolt with the suspension drooping and then risking ripping this rubber bushing down here. Alright, so driver's side is done, wheel is back on. So now we can work our way to the passenger side, get that taken care of. Like I said, it's the exact same thing, just on the opposite side. So once again, pull this bolt out, drop the lower basket down, and pull the spring out, and put everything back together. Alright, so I flipped the car around, jacked up the front, and now we can get to work replacing the front springs here. So the front is a little bit more labor intensive. There's some more bolts and nuts and all that stuff you have to take off. So what you're gonna need to remove to get the front struts and springs off is this brake piece right here. So that's a 12mm. Then you have this bracket down here. There's two 14mm bolts here, a 14mm bolt here, and then the main through bolt for the shock is a 19. And that's also linked to the sway bar end link. There's a little nut in here that you can put a wrench on. So we'll get to getting those disconnected, and then you pull this little just ABS line off here. Then once that's all done on the bottom, then we can come up here, take these nuts off. They're 12mm, and then the whole assembly should pull out. Alright, so I have the strut and spring out of the car. Obviously it comes out right from here. So just the 3 strut tower nuts up top. And then this is the bracket that I mentioned that sits like this. That's 3 14mm bolts there. And then the end link goes through the lower control arm. And you take that big nut off, which sits in that hole right there on the bracket. And then once you remove your brake line from the strut, it'll just slide out, and I took it out through back here. So as you can see, I got my spring compressors on. Just tighten them down a little bit. Be super careful when you're using these. You can rent these again from any Advanced Auto, AutoZone, whatever's closest to you. I recommend, like I said, just being super careful, wearing some safety glasses when you do this, because if that breaks, you'd be in some big trouble. So now, once these are tightened down, I just have to remove the nut up here, and the top hat will come off. We can get to putting the new springs on. Alright, so front suspension is all apart. Old springs are there, and new springs are ready to go on. I have the other side over here. This is actually about my 4th day working on this car for this project. Not consecutively, but I ran into some issues getting some nuts and bolts off. So I went out, I had to get a cheap little compressor for the time being and get this stuff taken care of. These were actually the biggest problem I had to get off. I attempted to use a little wrench to hold it in place and then use a box wrench on this, but this actually started to strip. So needless to say, it's pretty crucial to have a compressor of some kind to get this job done. So like I said, now that this is all apart, I'm going to just do everything in reverse order. Some lowering springs, depending on which brand you get, you don't need to compress them to get them back together. But since these aren't much of a drop compared to stock, I am going to have to put the compressors on here, get them squeezed up a little bit so I can get the top hats back on. And then we can take that and throw it back in there. Alright guys, so I got the driver's side assembled and in the car. Just have to work on tightening everything up down the bottom. It's a funny story. I obviously tried to use the spring compressors to compress the spring down, but they were pretty much as far down as they could go, and the spring wasn't compressed enough to allow me to put the top hat on and the nut. So what I basically did was bolted the top hat back to the car, then put the spring on and the shock itself. Then I put the lower mounting bolt back in and basically jacked up from the control arm until it came through enough up here to get the nut on. It's, again, something I've never done before, never tried, but I was kind of running out of options with using these crappy spring compressors. Probably not the safest or smartest thing I've ever done, but like I said, I was running out of options, and that's the only thing I thought of. I personally probably wouldn't recommend doing that just for safety reasons, but it ended up working. So if you do run into the same problem, you can try that, but you didn't hear from me. So now I'm basically going to do the same with the passenger side and get that thrown in, and then we can button this thing up and get it back on the ground. Alright, so I did the same thing on the passenger side that I did on the driver's side. Put the top hat up first, then slid the rest of the assembly on, jacked it up from the bottom, and then put the nut on the nut up top here. So on both sides, basically just have to go through, tighten up everything, finish putting in all the bolts on this side, tighten up this side and the driver's side. And then finally, after many days of working on this, the car should be done. Throw the wheels back on, drop it down, see how it looks, make sure everything's good, and take it for a spin, and hopefully it'll be ready for the alignment tomorrow. Alright, so here's the car with the new springs installed. The car has been aligned. Obviously there's still a little bit of wheel gap. That's to be expected with these springs. It's not going to slam the car, obviously. Front to back, the drop is pretty even. On these cars, stock, the front end sits a little bit, or at least there's a little bit more wheel gap in the front compared to the back. Now the gap is pretty much, like I said, even front to back. It looks super good, and it's great, a great height for a daily driver. It's not too low, and obviously doesn't have the 4x4 status that it did before. So that concludes the install video of the Swift springs on my G37. Again, it's not a super hard install to do. However, I would recommend that you have some air tools for the front suspension. That's what gave me the most problems and took the longest. But if you have the right tools, it's not really a difficult job. Just take some time and a little bit of patience. So I hope I covered all the bases on this install, you know, what you need to do to get these springs on. If I missed anything, or if you have any questions, if anything's unsure, drop a comment down below. I'll do my best to answer everything you post. I'm a little late to finish this video, kind of did this in pieces, so you may be seeing the, you may have saw the review video for these springs before this video. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. I'll give you my thoughts and opinions, you know, on how they are, how they ride, you know, the height and all that, and just what I think overall of the product. So please give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, if this was helpful to you, if you're doing this install, and anything I gave, you know, anything I provided helped you with the install. I'd really appreciate it. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do so. Like I said, this channel is for all of you, and it would be nothing without all of your support, and I greatly appreciate that. So once again, I hope everyone enjoyed the video. Hopefully it was helpful to you. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day, and I'll see you next time.